Thanks to everyone that's organized this conference and hosting us. It's been great for this morning. I missed yesterday, sadly, but we're going to get a little exercise to start out. So I'm going to ask a few questions. I'm going to ask you to stand or sit, depending on your answer. It's pretty simple. I'd like to ask you to please stand up if you're a veteran. And please, everyone, take notice of who's around the room. Please stand up if you're a military family member. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Current, past. That's all I'm saying. And please stand up if you know someone currently deployed in Iraq or Afghanistan. All right. Cool. Okay, you can sit down. Please stand up if you've ever been arrested for justice. Cool. Alright, these are the last two. Alright, a little complicated. So stand up if you've ever made a demand to an elected official or decision maker. Alright, now stay standing. Please remain standing if your demands have been met. Sometimes. Good. Alright, so that's what I'm here to talk about. How do we actually make the change that we want? How do we actually get our demands met? How do we build power? What is power, right? So, it's clear from our work that we need power. We need the power to change the world, right? How do we get that power? What is power, right? Power, quite simply, being the ability to act, right? The ability to end the wars, the ability to change the economy in your community, these kind of things, right? But how do people get that kind of power, you know? A lot of my mentors say there's two kinds of power in the world, you know? There's organized money, and there's organized people. Which one do you think I'm here to talk about? Right. So, how do we organize people? We can't get all that organized money, right? We have the other kind of power. We have the numbers, right? There's a great quote. It's something like, we have to stop thinking that we're going to win because the majority of people are on our side, the facts are on our side, or we're morally right. Because our opponents have none of those things, and they're consistently winning. How is that? It's because they have power. Right? So how do we get that kind of power to win? How do you do that? In my organization, Civilian Soldier Alliance, we talk a lot about leadership. Because in our work, leadership and relationships are what we think actually organizes people. That's where you get people power, is leadership. So how do you become a leader for social change? I mean, we weren't born into this, right? We didn't pop out and go, yeah, I'm ready to change the world, you know? That's not how it works. So it's a process of transformation. It's a transformation of an individual, become a leader, and in turn, transforming lots of individuals transforms a society. And we call this transformational organizing. And the idea here is that this is a process. It's a process for the individual, it's a process for the society, but it's one that can be very intentional. And so we try to use transformative organizing. This is opposed to, say, transactional. Often, unions will do this, We go into your workplace, you should join the union because you're going to get a better wage. It's in your self-interest, right? You should join our group because we're going to bring your son home from Iraq. That kind of thing. That's different than transformational, which is, we're going to organize so that together the society will change. So where do we learn this? In my own experience, I started out as a student organizer. I organized a 5-day student strike on my campus to end the war. Right? We went on hunger fast, did all these things. Right? I don't know if you noticed, but the war didn't end. And that's in part because we didn't have analysis of our own power and what our demands were. We did a lot of mobilizing. We got hundreds of students on our campus involved. We raised thousands of dollars for UNICEF. Hundreds of professors went fasting with us. This did not organize the campus. This was not in the war. This was mobilizing. This was more, getting lots of people there. How many people have been to a really, really big protest before? Right? Mobilizing. Now, I'm here to talk about organizing. Transformational organizing. It's a little different. And so it's a distinction. And in my own history, I did the student organizing. I saw things like the protests in Seattle. Was anyone here involved in the Seattle protests in 1999? Against World Trade Organization? Oh, cool. Watching these things, watching these flashpoints, watching Tahrir Square. Lots and lots of people mobilize. Right? How do we do that? And kind of really getting infatuated with these flashpoints and missing the years of work it took to make those flashpoints happen. That I can't just call for mobilization, a student strike. Lots of people did that in the 60s. It doesn't actually, that's not all there is to it. That's only one piece of this whole process of transformation. And so mobilizations are important. They can happen. Rallies are great. Protests are great. But they're not the end of itself. They're not actually what makes the change. They're a piece of it. Right? It's kind of like I get this example of, it's like watching someone build a house. You're like, I want a house like that. I know, all I need is a hammer. They have a hammer, I'll get a hammer. You're ignoring all the other tools. You're ignoring the carpentry, So organizing is like carpentry, mobilizing is like the hammer. It's just a tool in your tool bag of organizing. Right? So in order to get examples of this kind of model, I had to actually look outside of the peace movement. Much of my experience, I was organizing event after event, protest after protest. I was going lobbying all the time, visit after visit. My demands didn't change. I didn't bring anyone new with me, I wasn't actually organizing. And this became very frustrating, we're not watching the change happen. So outside the peace movement, we can take leadership from movements that are winning, particularly poor people's movements that are winning all over the place. One example is the United Workers in Baltimore. Have you all ever heard of United Workers? Anybody? Yeah. So they use transformative organizing. It's where my organization, Civilian Soldier Alliance, learned a lot about this. In turn, the United Workers learned a lot about this from the Coalition of Immokalee Workers and the Student Farm Worker Alliance. These are very successful organizations. In the case of CIW, they've won every single campaign they've ever started. That's a huge victory, right? And the United Workers, they started and made a 5-year plan. They won a living wage for every worker at Camden Yards in 3 years. They use transformative organizing. And they do this by focusing on leadership development, right? And the idea here is that with the Camden Yards example, with the United Workers, they ultimately won doing a hunger strike. They did not start with a hunger strike. It's not appropriate to look at the United Workers and go, I know, I'll do a hunger strike and then I'll get a living wage. No, it's not that's the flashpoint. They did years of organizing, leadership development, going to Camden Yards and doing outreach every day. Right? And there, in the end, they had 30 people, 30 workers on hunger strike. Something like 15 or 16 of them weren't even working at Camden Yards anymore. It wasn't even in their self-interest. Right? They won because they were transformed. They wanted to see Baltimore change. They wanted to see poverty end. That's the goal of United Workers. And they used focused campaigns to develop leadership of affected communities to actually win victories. Right? So if the name of the game is leadership development, campaigns are the train you're on to do that. Right? And so in the United Workers example, their big victory, okay, they got a living wage, they got a union, they got health benefits. People went from earning less than minimum wage to earning over $11 an hour with full benefits and a union. And that wasn't United Workers' victory. United Workers said their victory was 30 new leaders. Right? 30 new people to go on, and now they have a campaign, the Human Rights Zone in the Inner Harbor. They're hosting a conference this fall called the Conference on Fair Development. It's all about looking at development of Baltimore City in terms of the human rights framework. How can we respect human rights and develop our city fairly? This is peace economy. Right? United Workers are the people doing that in Baltimore. So we learn from these folks. We learn from folks like Coalition of Immokalee Workers, who are tomato growers in Immokalee, Florida, doing the same thing. They've teamed up with students from Student Farm Worker Alliance to boycott companies that purchase these tomatoes. Right? So students are using their power on their campuses in solidarity with workers in Immokalee who are also organizing. Right? So, in looking to the peace movement for these kind of examples, I'm very excited. Particularly what's going on with the Bring the War Dollars Home, with Move the Money. This is a big part of my work at Peace Action, just helping to kind of broadcast this work out. Right? And so, one thing that's going on, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, is the Fund Our Communities Bring the War Dollars Home Coalition in Maryland. Many people have heard about them. Code Pink folks and everyone there. So this was an effort initiated by members of Peace Action Montgomery, who started out 2 or 3 years ago, setting their sights on military recruiters in public schools. They went to the state legislation and they were trying to, state legislature, they're trying to organize there. They're trying to say, protect students' rights. We don't want recruiters recruiting our students for wars of aggression. This doesn't make any sense, right? And they didn't get anywhere. They identified, we're the peace movement, we want recruiters out of schools. They didn't get anywhere. The next year they tried a different tactic. They created a coalition of folks, right wing, left wing, no wing, and they called it student privacy. That was their issue. Recruiters consistently violate the privacy of students all over the place. We can get into that later. But with that, they actually won. They won new legislation banning the ASVAB test from public schools and high schools. And in part because they got smart and they didn't identify as an anti-war peace group in these things. They thought we actually need a community. We actually need a cross-section of Maryland in order to make this happen. So they went out and did it. And now a lot of this coalition is what's behind the Fund Our Communities Bring the War Dollars Home. I went to their first meeting, and the president of the local United Food and Commercial Workers Union stood up, and he's like, we'll put up $10,000 for this right now. Who else is with us? Right? This is the union. Right? So these are unions jumping on board with this. Peace Action Montgomery and others are leading the way in building a new cross-section of the Maryland, a new coalition. So this is an example of building coalitions, going to organized sectors of a community and working together on something that affects all of them. So they're going to church groups, they're going to unions, they're doing this kind of thing. They're going to high schools, they have students, they're having a town hall on September 20th where they have members of the government speaking, they're going to have breakout groups and all these kind of things and actually do some organizing there. This is very exciting for me. But that's an example of kind of the coalition building within the peace movement. This is organizing organized people. So I'm going to give another example, which is our work with Civilian Soldier Alliance, and that's Operation Recovery. And this is a campaign in which we are using transformative organizing to develop the leadership of active duty service members and veterans, as well as civilian allies. Thank you. And this is a base building campaign. And that's different from a coalition building campaign, right? The idea is that the military is highly organized, or mostly against us. We can't go to a unit and be like, does your unit want to co-sponsor our Bring the War Dollars Home coalition? It's not going to work, right? So we have to go to individuals in the military, individual veterans, and this is called base building. We're going into a community and trying to build up a base of leaders. And this doesn't mean we go in there and go, hey, aren't you against the war as much as we are? I know you just got back. Does not work, right? So we spent years thinking about this. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the Rock Veterans Against the War. They started as a speaking bureau. They're going out talking about war resistance, and supporting people who refuse orders, this kind of thing. This is still ongoing work. It's still really important. But these veterans, together with Civilian Soldier Alliance, together with other civilian allies, developed a campaign through a long process, 4 days of intense consensus. Right? And what we landed on was Operation Recovery. And Operation Recovery seeks to stop the deployment of any service members diagnosed with traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, or military sexual trauma as a result of their service. How is this an anti-war campaign? Right? Well, currently, 20 to 50% of all service members deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan right now suffer from PTSD. Right? Somewhere between I have a fact sheet here, forgive me, but a large number of these troops are on psychotropic drugs. While in combat, there is absolutely no reporting on how these drugs are prescribed or taken. Like Army medics, for instance, are not required to write scripts. They just give out the drugs. Right, so we're arming people with trauma and dosing them up. Right? I mean, just last year, our campaign is focused in Killeen, Texas right now. It's one of our organizing spots. And we work with a coffee shop there called Under the Hood Cafe. Who's heard of Under the Hood? All right. Yeah. We also work with another one called Coffee Strong up in Joint Base Fort Lewis McChord. They've been recently getting some press. Yep. So we work at these coffee shops. In the case of Texas, I just got back from there a few weeks ago. We go on base in Fort Hood. Fort Hood is home to 3rd ACR. They're home to 101st Airborne. There's lots and lots of soldiers at Fort Hood. And we go on base there and we talk to them. Hey, Sergeant, you heard about Operation Recovery? You want to sign our pledge? We invite them to come out to the coffee shop. We don't go up there and ask them, hey, aren't you against the war? No, we have a campaign based on the experiences of service members and veterans. It was service members and veterans that said, we need to do something about this trauma. Right? And this becomes an anti-war campaign because without 20 to 50% of the fighting force in Iraq and Afghanistan, the occupations are no longer tenable. Right? They can't keep a war going without soldiers to fight it. And they're violating many of their own policies deploying troops like this. So in Fort Hood, for example, last year alone, there were 22 known suicides. Right? In Coffee Strong, where we have Joint Base Fort Lewis McChord, there were 4 suicides on post last month alone. Right? This is an epidemic that the military is refusing to deal with. And so we are organizing active duty service members and veterans to fight. Right? And we have a campaign here. And the campaign is the vehicle by which we develop the leadership of these service members and veterans. We're not asking them to come to protest immediately, these kind of things. We ask them to come have ribs with us at the coffee shop every Thursday for ribs and rights. Learn about GI rights, have free barbecue. Come to Women's Night on Monday night, these kind of things. At Coffee Strong, they give free coffee to anyone with an enlisted ID. They like to say that the officers have to pay double. So the whole idea here is that this campaign develops the leadership of those directly impacted by the wars. We are withdrawing consent from the war. So when a service member withdraws his consent, his or her consent from the war, refuses to partake, this ultimately depletes the power of the military to maintain the occupations. And this is our goal. And this is, as you might imagine, a long-haul campaign. Right? This is not, we're going to be in protests in 3 months and then the war will end. We make our plans in multi-year timelines. The United Workers, we learned this from. Phasing our campaigns, multi-year plans, having a set goal, tactics to achieve that goal. This is very important, and this is what wins. This is where we are seeing victories. And so with our campaign, it's also important to note that there are civilians whose experience is not in the military, who haven't been to Afghanistan and seen this firsthand, who maybe arrive in an anti-war or peace politic as a result of their own analysis. It's not in our direct experience, perhaps. Some others, it's like we have a member, her brother went to Iraq. She watched this, and this is what the legislature. So it's important to have a role for allies as well, to uplift our experience. And this is where groups like Civilian Soldier Alliance come from. We're civilian allies to service members and veterans. Student Farm Worker Alliance is the same thing. Students using their power on their campuses to stop companies from buying tomatoes from, poverty conditions in Immokalee. Simultaneously, Immokalee tomato farmers, organizing in the fields. These are the kinds of connections that work. So I think I think the title of the talk was something like "What Needs Changing," and perhaps aside from our economy, also the peace movement needs changing. Right? We need to start developing leadership. We need to not only be coalition building, working where the low-hanging fruit. Oh, okay, we'll get all the peace groups together and form a coalition. We actually need to be doing base building as well. The majority of people are on our side. We never talk to them. I go on base on post, and I talk to service members, active duty service members in uniform about Operation Recovery, And it's the easiest thing to get signatures on a pledge about that. You know, the hard part is getting that leadership and actually doing things with that. But the sentiments are there. And we need to be doing base building. We need to be doing campaign organizing. And most importantly, we need to take leadership for movements that are winning, like poor people's movements. Right? So I'm just going to leave it at that. And I don't know what our format is. 2 questions. Great.
Claire, will you get your hand up? Were you 5? Okay, and another 6. All right, 7, 8, no 7, 7.
Which is an option.
So, number 1. Yes?
Thank you for your presentation and for organizing this conference.
So can you speak up, sir?
Yeah, thank you for organizing this conference and your presentation. I'm Paul from Park City, Utah, Vietnam vet. I was a Vietnam vet against the war. And I'm noticing that most people here are probably in and around median age 59, 60. And when I was a young person, just the fact that Nixon and Johnson, we had the draft, that galvanized the youth movement very easily. We didn't even need leaders. We just all showed up in Washington and San Francisco, you know, with our protest signs. So I guess my question is, I mean, I'm seeing all the young people in the 70s here today, and I have great respect for you because of, you know, you're probably the youngest guy, the youngest person in the building today. You know, my generation has this perception that your generation is disengaged. I'm not saying that's correct. You're proof that I'm wrong. But I wonder, how do we galvanize, because I'm going to be dead in 15 years probably. We need your generation to carry on this kind of work. What is your thinking representing your generation, how to galvanize more so 20, 30 somethings?
Sure. That's a great question. And I also want to honor that we learn a lot from the Vietnam era youth anti-war activism in that movement. I mean, there were dozens of GI coffee houses all over the world, that over 400 GI newspapers in the Vietnam era. And you can read all about this in the book Soldiers in Revolt. Really just catalogs the massive amount of organizing happening within the active duty veteran community. But you know, this is a question that often comes up. The youth aren't missing, they're just not here. They're not in the peace movement in many ways. Myself, when I started out as a student organizer, it wasn't hard at all to find people to get involved in the anti-war movement. Hardest part is keeping them. Because these protests and mobilizations and things like that, we quickly learned weren't making the changes that we wanted. We weren't winning. And youth, we don't necessarily have a nostalgia for a protest that worked. Right. So perhaps we don't need to keep coming out. You know, a lot of the youth that I worked with in my student group are organizing in other sectors. They're organizing with the United Workers. They're organizing with Student Farm Worker Alliance. You know, they're organizing in movements that are winning. There are lots of youth involved. And so we need to think about campaign organizing that incorporates lots of communities, including youth, but also including people of color, also including workers and unions, service members. We need to think about that. So it is a conspicuous absence, young people, but there are a lot of other conspicuous absences in the room this weekend. So.
Yes.
And part of our challenge in that is identifying where those leaders are. Last week or the week before, there were dozens and dozens of young people being arrested in D.C. protesting tar sands. And that absolutely is our issue, right? So for us to be able to make those connections, the onus is on us to do that.
And it's not because the young people care more about tar sands. Because the tar sands organizing campaign intentionally involved young people and built up the leadership of young people. They even hired young people You know, they do all these things. And so it's creating space for youth organizing. The same way I go onto base and try to create space for active duty service members, arguably a lot harder. You know, I used to go onto college campuses and do that. You know, create leadership opportunities for young people. Until that's done, there won't be young people.
Number 2.
Jonathan, thank you very, very much. Absolutely wonderful contribution to this conference. One young woman that we tried to add as a speaker at this conference was a widow of one of those suicides last month in Washington State. Prior to coming to the conference, we got her on some television and radio shows, Democracy Now! And so forth, and she was so viciously harassed and threatened that she canceled everything. And it won't show her face outside her house. And so one question is, how do you deal with the pushback when you're doing organizing around bases? And secondly, I love that you said we set goals and targets for the coming years and so forth, but you didn't say what they were, and I'm really curious. Are they numbers of members? Are they changes in policy for this campaign?
Sure, they're both. In the case of asking people to expose their very deep personal experiences publicly is asking a lot. And that goes for veterans, that you're asked to talk about what their service was like, what their combat experience was like. That goes for military wives, asking what it was like when their husband committed suicide, these things. There is vicious pushback in all cases like that. You know, all the IVAW speakers, many of them don't organize anymore because they spoke out publicly and just got sick of it. It is a lot, and so part of the reason that Civilian Soldier Alliance exists is to model what it is to be a good ally. And in many ways, you know, it comes from that experience of having asked people to speak and do these things and getting really bad pushback or really bad experiences out of that, emotionally and personally. And so we do our best to try to mitigate that, but it is a very difficult thing to do. But also having a community of support is the best thing you can do in a situation like that. Coffee Strong has that woman's back, you know, I forget her name, but, you know, you know, this is a space that intentionally is created for just that kind of support. So I think organized support is very, very important. Just as much as organized people is to power, you need to have an organized, healing, caring community. We talk a lot about self-care and healing in our work because we are directly fighting trauma, so it becomes necessary. And in terms of our goals, yes, we have very, very explicit goals. We want, you know, by Veterans Day of 2012, we expect to win our first concession from General Campbell, who's our first target at Fort Hood. Based on our initial 3 months of outreach, we have numbers for exactly how many folks we're going to talk to on base each month, how many folks we're going to go visit them in their homes that month as a follow-up, how many folks we expect to come to our weekly events, and how many leaders. We have different gradations of leadership that we learn from United Workers. You know, we have potential leaders who, you know, appear to have a lot of leadership skills and qualities and interests and commitment in the campaign. We have emerging leaders who are just now getting involved. We have leaders who are definitely involved. You know, we keep going on up this kind of chain here, and we have numbers for all that. So by the time we win concessions, we hope to have at least 6 to 10 active duty service members on base at Fort Hood that are leading that effort. And we expect that it takes at least 18 months to do that, based on our initial months of outreach. So this is the scale at which we make our plans, right? And this is how we learn it from United Workers. And there's different phases in that process. You know, so we have 4-month cycles in which we go on to base, we do outreach, we host events, we follow up with home visits, we provide space for leadership activities, so you ask people to commit to doing something as part of the campaign. Maybe it's something small, like come have ribs with us. And maybe next week's like, you want to organize the rib night with us? This kind of thing. And so all those numbers are fleshed out, and we can talk more about that specifically after if people are interested.
Number 3.
I am so happy to see and hear you this morning.
political.
I'm not political.
Exactly.
It's not about a party, it's not about a campaign, it's not a 501c4. It's completely educational,
Yes.
completely see-through.
Absolutely.
No worries.
And I want to tell you that all the people who run for office in our district ask to come and talk to us.
Hmm.
So I'm hoping you'll find it worth your while to come and talk to us.
Oh, well, I'm honored. Thank you. Yeah.
All right.
I'd be happy to.
How can we arrange?
Yeah, talk to me after.
Yeah.
Great.
Come on.
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Number 4. Aha.
Thank you. You're very encouraging. I wanted to ask you, what did you say you do with the active duty officers? They remove their consent from participating in war, or what?
Yeah, this is like a nonviolence strategy, right? So the idea is that war is held up in part by having active duty service members willing to fight it. They consent to participating in the war. Right? This is how we talk about active duty soldiers' participation. And so our whole strategy is to simply withdraw that consent. This happened in huge numbers during Vietnam. 1 in 7 deployed soldiers in Vietnam went AWOL, right? Absent without leave. They withdrew their consent from combat. And so the war ultimately became untenable because soldiers refused to fight in Vietnam. And that's ultimately why Congress cut funding, because they got video of an entire brigade of soldiers refusing orders. So like,
That's a pacifist dream. I naively thought that when we ended the draft, nobody would volunteer. But I heard some very moving testimony from ex-Marines who are now pacifists, and they were very concerned about violating their oath. And I wondered how you overcome that. Once you've made an oath to the government, how can you remove your consent?
well, the oath, to differentiate that from a contract you sign, which is illegal, the oath that you take is you swear to the Constitution. And just about every member of IBAW thinks that invading Iraq does not defend the Constitution, that the oath that they swore is to defend enemies of the Constitution. They just think that those enemies are at home.
Number 5.
We were talking about withdrawing consent, and as we go and approach soldiers who are at a high risk to withdraw. I wondered if we, who are the citizen allies, are consenting every 1040 that we fill out and send in. And I think shared risk is the best way to build a sense of solidarity with people. And I wondered how much and when will we citizens who continue to pay year after year be willing to take on some of the risk that we have been asking soldiers who say withdraw your consent, because it is by our consent also.
Certainly, yeah.
And so I wonder what sort of, my question being, what sort of alliances are made with war tax resistance movements, and how we can, each of us, take on some of the risks of peace and be willing to bear some of the feedback from that. Thank you.
Certainly. I could expound a lot on war tax resistance. In terms of its scale, I mentioned importantly that 20 to 50% of deployed service members currently are diagnosed with PTSD. If there was a policy preventing them from being deployed, literally the war would have to end because occupation would end. How many people would it take resisting taxes for the war to end? Right. So this is, a scale question, perhaps. But in terms of taking risk, that's also another important part of being an ally to service members, is recognizing a very different experience that we bring. And that in many ways, there is no way for us to take that risk equally. We take different risks. And it's just that. It's apples and oranges in many ways. And part of being a good ally is knowing that people are taking a risk and not asking them, as I did 5 years ago when I got started organizing with veterans. And I went on base at Fort Dix in New Jersey, and I talked to 101st Airborne. I was like, "You guys heard about Iraq Veterans Against the War?" And they beat me up, So it was very different. It's because I didn't, these guys just got back. They don't want to hear about Against the War from some guy with torn jeans. So it was, that's another power of Operation Recovery, is that we are talking about people's experience. When I say to soldiers on base, have you heard about people being deployed with trauma, everyone says, yes, it's a numbers game, it sucks. It's their experience that I'm relating to. And so I think that is perhaps the most important thing, is recognizing where people are coming from. And it does make sense that you're sharing risk and things. But more importantly, it's identifying yourself as someone who is open and willing to support leadership and support people in those moments. And that's also what the coffee shops are about, and having those folks. And we send people down to Texas for, pennies to live down there and organize on base and, change their whole lives and uproot themselves and go to Killeen, Texas, which is the most fun place in the world, to go talk to soldiers on base. And so I think it's about that relationship.
And number 6?
I'm sorry, I'm so overwhelmed by all the, I can't even tell me the questions, so I just hope that
We are, actually. We're going to shift into, well, we do have a question.
I guess I would just like to interject that transformative and
Action.
when the earlier pacifists back in the day, we were practicing transcendental meditation, and while the CIA was developing LSD, it really, it starts with your consciousness. And I just wanted to bring into, with that background, my own personal experience, the first time I ever went on a military base to shop, I saw these goods there for pennies, and I was like, well, wait a minute, how is it possible that these soldiers are living on they're all American, they're supposed to be defending us, they're on a completely different economy. Why isn't the entire country on the military economy? Why are we all paying, why are we not all shopping at military PXs? Why are we not all getting our computers at the same rate? Why are we paying 4 cents down for gas because the federal government can do that? And then, this conference has had a lot of historical connections with the past and how other people are here, you're here, and then Paul yesterday said you're in World Peace Movement. I guess I'm having trouble formulating a vision of where this process is going to bring us. And I know that the creative process is a very creative process. And sometimes if you envision what the goal is, you miss what it is that your attention should be. So I guess I thought I had a question in the beginning, but I can't get my mind around it. It's just so vast. But I do appreciate, and I'm curious, where did you go to college to start your language? I mean, you speak military, you speak base, you speak a sergeant. I don't know how to communicate with them.
We were trained. I went down as a guest organizer in Fort Hood and was memorized all the ranks and insignia and how to address people. This is all part of the training that you receive as a guest organizer as part of our program. So we have resident organizers that commit to living there for at least 2 months. We've had one down there for 6 months now, or 5 months now, 4 months. But these resident organizers kind of anchor the whole program. And then we have it's basically a training school. So you can come down there for a minimum of 5 days or more and learn how to do on-base outreach and go home and do it. And so it's part training camp, part actually organizing camp. And one of the things that we learned from United Workers is the 3 C's of leadership. One of those is consciousness. And that's really critical in transformation. One of the reasons I do this work is because I met Iraq veterans against the war early on. For our hunger strike, we held classes. We weren't not going to class, we were holding alternative classes taught by veterans and military family members and Iraqi civilians and all those kind of folks. And for me, it was just amazing to hear from someone like Garrett Reppenhagen, who's chair of the board right now, who is a sniper. Right? So he went from being willing to kill or be killed to a complete 180 to never wanting to pick up a weapon again. That transformation was possible through that experience that he had. Right? If it's possible for them, it's possible for a lot of other people. So how do you actually do that transformation on purpose? And also recognizing that that is a very different, very, very different transformation than someone like myself who heard Garrett talk and it changed my life. You know, that's very different. Coming from a place of completely caring and willing to risk my life for the war to completely caring and willing It's very different from, I didn't really think about it before, to, oh yeah, I guess it makes sense. You know, so the process of transformation is something that's about your consciousness, you know, and going to active duty service members and meeting them where they are, and through barbecue, through conversations, through weeks and weeks of relationship building and making friends, that this transforms people. And so in the case of Coffee Strong, they just put up pictures on Facebook. These were folks that are active duty soldiers. They're all a bunch of gun nuts that love that kind of stuff. But here they are serving coffee to striking teachers in Tacoma. Right? They are making connections with other movements as a result of their consciousness transforming because of the work that they're doing, because of the campaign that they're working on, because they opened this coffee shop. You know, so it's through campaign work and things like this that we actually undergo that process of transformation, both as individuals and on a large scale as a society.
Yes.
Oh dear. Commitment.
Oh, you can't remember.
There's the other C, which is like, there's the silent C, which is competence.
So consciousness, commitment,
Competence.
Competence.
I never remember the other one.
oh well. There's a
Compassion, that was it. Yeah.
yes, thank you, Sam. So consciousness, commitment, compassion, and competency. All right.
One of them's silent.
All right, good. Okay, so, yes, thanks so much.